Okay. I don't know if we'll need this, but probably we will. Probably best to use the microphone. So listen, thank you for coming out. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. This is a really, really important moment as we all face into what may be, what is likely coming our way, even though we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. It's time for us, I think, to really start talking amongst ourselves and getting our heads together and making some plans if we can. And so with that, it's really, really great to be able to welcome Glenn Formica to our church and to Old Lyme. Glenn is an old friend. Glenn has been here many, many times before. He shepherded us through the sanctuary process with Malik and Zaida. And he has helped us on other cases as well. Glenn has a unique ability to see around the corner, to see around the bend in terms of what might be coming at us. And we've had a lot of conversations over the last several months. Before I turn things over to Glenn, I'm going to read a passage from a document that a lot of our boards and committees have been studying lately, and that I have actually preached on once, and I'll probably return to. This is the South African Kairos document written in 1986. It is amazingly prescient, and it's a kind of mobile theory for how churches, for how people of faith, for how communities of conscience might respond to crises in their midst. And so I want to read this quick description here that helps to set the stage. So the writers say, why has church theology, a kind of theology that comes under heavy criticism in this document, why has it not developed a social analysis? Why does it have an inadequate understanding of the need for political strategies? And why does it make a virtue of neutrality and sitting on the sidelines? The answer must be sought in the type of faith and spirituality that has dominated church life for centuries. As we all know, spirituality has tended to be an otherworldly affair that has very little, if anything, to do at all with the affairs of this world. Social and political matters were seen as worldly affairs that have nothing to do with the spiritual concerns of the church. Moreover, spirituality has also been understood to be a purely private and individualistic affair. Public affairs and social problems were thought to be beyond the sphere of spirituality. And finally, the spirituality we inherit tends to rely upon God to intervene in God's own good time to put right what is wrong in the world. That leaves very little for human beings to do except to pray for God's intervention. And then they say this: it is precisely this kind of spirituality that, when faced with the present crisis in South Africa, or we can now say the United States, leaves so many Christians and so many church leaders in a state of near paralysis. It hardly needs saying that this kind of faith and this type of spirituality has no biblical foundation. The Bible does not separate the human person from the world in which he or she lives. It does not separate the individual from the social or one's private life from one's public life. It's with this kind of understanding, it's with this kind of theology that we can begin as a faith community, but as an entire community here in Old Lyme and beyond as people of conscience, to begin to wrap our minds around how we might respond socially and politically to this present moment. This is something that I think requires our best thinking, that it requires us to enact a theology that understands the whole person. So with that, I want to turn this over to Glenn, and I'll have you speak about your work as an immigration attorney and your work as you are imagining what's coming before us. So Glenn, thank you for being here.
everybody for turning out. I wasn't expecting so many. Just so you know, seeing you and being here is as much is really self-indulgent on my part, because like a lot of you hear things in the news. You have a lived experience. We all lived through the last Trump administration, and sometimes when you're alone with your thoughts, at night when you're laying in bed, you hear something in the closet. And the monster in the closet is always much worse than the monster in the room. And similarly, when you're alone in that room and you hear the monster in the closet, when you see somebody come into the room, suddenly the monster disappears. So for me, in a very meaningful way, seeing you makes the monster disappear from me. I also want to make sure that tonight I get a chance to answer questions, because I think it's a good time for us just to get the fears out. I don't really have any powers of prediction, unfortunately. I'm no Baba Vanga or Nostradamus. I think anybody who's tried to predict anything in the past 10 years has been pretty challenged. But I think just by sometimes hearing what we're afraid of in the room can have a real calming effect and sort of bring some peace to our minds. The other thing I want to tell you before I begin, because it's a shared experience that we all had, was back in 2018, this church, the first time I showed up in this church, you had 2 immigrants afraid of the Trump administration deporting them back to Pakistan. And when I came into this church, I had no idea how that was going to turn out. I really had no thought in my mind as to a legal strategy, because without getting into the weeds, there was none. There was no hope. There was no legal hope of Malik and Zayas remaining in the United States. And I knew that. I just didn't know how to break it to all of you at the time, because I felt that'd be a big disappointment, since you had done this amazingly brave thing and put these 2 people into the church basement. I want you all to think about that tonight when you go home and over the next few days. Your church was the place of what I would consider to be a miracle. More of a miracle to me, because I understand, maybe, unless there's other lawyers in the room, the impossibility of what happened to Malik and Zahida. Like, really the impossibility of what happened to Malik and Zahida. And that they're still living a good life, and happily so, up in New Britain. That's you guys. I mean, it's God, but it's you guys. It's God working through you all. I would also mention that your church, and I'm not talking in woo-woo or any new age stuff, I really do feel like your church is protected. I do feel like your church is a true sanctuary. There is some magic, spooky dust, sprinkles that are over this church. And I think you're lucky to have it as a place of your own refuge. And I hope you take advantage of it over the next few years, no matter what's coming, that you use this space. This space has become a bit of a refuge for me, even after Malik and Zayeda left. Of course, I pop over to see Steve. But there was a brief period where I just could only get work done up in that library upstairs, and a couple of times I came back because I had some briefs to do, and I was like, I just need the space. I mean, Malik and Zayeda were long gone. I snuck in and used it. The other thing I would mention, because a lot of people are frustrated that we're here again, that we're gathering together, that we're worried about what's going to happen to our neighbors, to our community, whether there's going to be more raids, and it's all back to where it was like 4 years ago. And there's a sense of frustration, at least I have a sense of frustration. There's an allegory that, well, let me just back up a step. I have not really been watching cable news because it let me down, before November 5th. So I've just gotten rid of cable news. So that leaves this empty space in my life to fill it with other things. So I've gone back to doing things like reading and listening to a lot of podcasts, watching a lot of Netflix. But one of the things I've been reading were some of the Hindu proverbs or Hindu allegories. And there's an allegory that resonates with me now about the work that is about to come. And just as a little background for this allegory, and I've never been to India, it's on my bucket list, but I've never been. Apparently in India, their idea of the Build Back Better or the Infrastructure Act is that they'll go to rural communities, government will, and they will build roads the old way by hand. And these roads will eventually connect to like an urban center or a bigger town or some other economic opportunity. And it's because these really poor villages, there's no work. So the work they're offered is breaking large rocks into smaller rocks and small rocks into gravel. And so the allegory is about some guy named Bhavik. And he's out along the side of the road breaking large rocks into small rocks and small rocks into gravel. And he gets it in his head that this can't be my life. Not to get into all Hinduism, but it's called Dharma. This is not my purpose, is to break rocks, and this is no life. So he gets it into his head that he is going to be the first father in his village to send his daughter to college. And he begins to work any day that the job site is open. And that means 7 days a week. He's just working, breaking large rocks into small rocks into gravel for the roadbed. And after about 5 or 6 years, that takes a toll on the body, breaking rocks every day. And he becomes ill, and he dies. He dies 3 weeks before his daughter is going to go to college. So his daughter, tears in her eyes one morning, first day of school, gets on her bicycle and rides to college on the road that her father, Bhavik, had spent his life building to a city nearby that is now connected by the road. And so the allegory is, what was Bhavik's purpose? Bhavik believed he was breaking rocks to send his daughter to college, which is what he did. He succeeded. His daughter went to college. But what Bhavik didn't understand was that he was breaking rocks and building a road connecting his village to a city so that the other people in the village, the other children, the other people didn't have to break rocks. They could get on their bicycle and go to work in the city and pursue a more meaningful life. And what I've been reflecting on with that story, for some reason this has just been in my mind for the past several weeks, because sometimes I feel like my career has been like breaking larger rocks into smaller rocks, into gravel. Ostensibly in my mind it's to help immigrants. I don't really know, and I think it's the mystery of life, it's the mystery of God, what that larger purpose is. Maybe I'm building a road in my own little way that is connecting. And I think immigration, for whatever reason, is about immigration, right? I mean, that's how I see it. Set of laws, the INA. But I also think that there's something else that we're being called to look at when we deal with the issue of immigration. It's not just about removal orders and about who gets to stay and who gets to go and this political view and that political view. I think there's something more. There's a mystery there as to what it means in the larger sense. And the fact that Trump has said that this is going to be day one stuff, that it's going to be huge, that it's going to be this big show, and that we're here tonight figuring out how to respond to it, there's good in that. I mean, there's a challenge in that, there's fear in that, but there's something good in that. And our response, whatever that purpose is, even if we're just breaking rocks on the side of the road, I think it's important that we do this. And I also think in an odd sort of way that instead of dreading this work, instead of being like, oh God, I've got to go out and do this again, we're going to have to figure this out, we're going to have to suffer that. I'm not the guy that uses joy easily. But where I think I would part company with Bhavik is, even though the work is painful, and even though the work is exhausting, and even though I sometimes feel like my body's breaking down from it, from the stress, I'm eternally appreciative that I get to do this. And that, this is right in my lane. Like, I can't go this way, I can't go that way, I'm not a property lawyer, I'm not an intellectual property. I mean, like, this is right in my lane. He's coming right for my clients. He's coming right at my community. He's coming right at everything I've spent 27 years declaring as my purpose in life, my dharma. And yet it's here now, and this is it. So that's just something to give you perspective before we start talking about what may be coming. And let me transition a little bit to what may be coming. Without prediction, but sort of sensing what I know is the practical reality of what can be done. On day one, week one, month one, you're going to see some very high-profile raids. You're going to see ICE vans picking people up in a pretty aggressive way. Right? I mean, they can do that without changing any regulations. Let me just give you a quick law lesson real quick, because this may be important. And if you know this, those of you that know this, I apologize for being so basic. But the way it works is we have the legislature, Article 1, they create the laws, and then we have Article 2, which is the executive, and they interpret the laws with regulations. So Congress says, you know, keep it simple. I mean, Congress says that the decision to adjust status, to give somebody a green card, is in the sole discretion of the Attorney General. The Attorney General looks at that and then interprets that law and writes regulations, federal regulations. And those regulations become how the laws are implemented. And so, in our case for immigration, Congress passed the Immigration Nationality Act. The Biden administration amended some of the regulations. Previous Trump had its own regulations. Regulations come and go. There's notice and comment, but they take time to change regulations. And that's just how they're going to apply or interpret the law. Then you have Congress. I mean, you have the judiciary, Article 3. And they interpret constitutionality and they interpret whether these regulations are being applied correctly to what the statute says, right? A little boring law lesson there. The very conservative Supreme Court did away with Chevron. It said that federal judges are now able to make their own determination as to the meanings of these statutes. So the deference that used to be, courts would always say, that's the Article 2's decision on how to interpret the laws. Now it goes to judges. Now another quirky thing about our judiciary. This is all in the hope bucket. So we're still filling the hope bucket here. That's terrible for the environment. That's terrible for FAA regulation. That's terrible for every other area of law that I can think of, except immigration. Because we have this quirky thing in the United States that if you get one district court judge in one rando district to declare something is unlawful and pass an injunction, you've now got 2 to 3 years of appellate process to fight that all the way up to the Supreme Court, which may or may not take it, may or may not put it on the active docket, whatever. So 2 to 3 years. That's a really good thing for us right now. Now, under Biden, it was frustrating because the the conservatives would go find that rando judge down in Texas. It was always out of Texas. Because that's where all the rando judges are. And they would get an injunction if Biden wanted to, pass a law that allows local processing of 601 waivers. We'll get into what all that means, but something that would have helped parents of U.S. citizen children obtain stats. Judge puts the nix on it. Well, guess what? Now it's our turn. So we get to go find that rando judge in Massachusetts, or California to go pass an injunction. Now, there's talk about changing that, and we're going to have a Republican majority or something of a Republican majority, so who knows how that's going to work out. But for now, that's in place. So that's a little bit of a background to say that on day one, week one, month one, whatever these things come down, they're going to look terrible on TV. But hopefully there will be a response, and there is a very good, we have a very good, I can say this with enormous pride, the legal bar in this country is really sort of the last line for Constitution. You know, Congress may fail, the President may fail, the Supreme Court may fail, but the lawyers will hold the line. And I wouldn't have said that until the first Trump administration, because I would have said a lot of my colleagues will hold the line for $1. They held the line for the Constitution, and they did amazing things. The ACLU did amazing things. The Immigrant Justice Fund did amazing things. They brought these incredible class actions, and they really changed the course of things. So on day one, week one, month one, there will be raids. That's going to be a lot of show. What is scary is that they are building a lot of detention centers. So we could see people be swept up, put in detention centers, and they're not like they're going to be detention centers in Springfield, Mass, or Storrs, Connecticut. They're going to be in Texas, Louisiana, Georgia. And they're not going to be particularly good detention centers. They seem to, this hard right seems to take pride. I don't know what it is about the right wing or fascists. They all like camps. They just have this thing about camps. So here in America, we're going to have camps. And that's going to be a problem because for people to get representation, individual representation, it's going to require having a lawyer likely go to that detention facility far away. So when they pick people up in Connecticut, in the old days, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they would send them to Massachusetts. Greenfield, Mass was a detention facility I was very familiar with. Not actually that bad one, actually. Very clean. There was Plymouth, there was Dartmouth in Massachusetts. Dartmouth was the worst, absolute worst. We had the version of our Sheriff Arpaia from Arizona. He was like reincarnated in this sheriff in Massachusetts who ran the Dartmouth facility. He would give people a choice between a pillow or a coat. So if you got a coat, you didn't get a pillow, but you could use your coat as a pillow. They would have metal beds. I mean, it was the stuff that lawsuits are made of. The unfortunate thing is those lawsuits took a lot of time, and they broke the will of a lot of immigrants. A lot of immigrants were like, just get me out of this. It's cold. I haven't slept in a month. Just send me home. Give up. And that'll be the same idea with the camps that they're building down south. Make them unbearable so that people give up, ask for the deportation, and leave. That's ultimately, I think, what it is. The second thing is it's going to create a general sense of fear and really drive people underground, get people to voluntarily just say enough. And I will tell you, a lot of my clients have already indicated that they are not going to stick around if it gets bad. They have enough on their plate. They're like, this is crazy. I've been here 30 years. I've never gotten my legal status because the laws never allowed me to. I'm just going to go home. I don't need this indignity. I don't need to be arrested. The other thing is there's a possibility that, from what I'm hearing, that certain states may be targeted. Connecticut could theoretically be targeted, And when I say targeted, they'll just do like really intense enforcement actions here because we're a blue state, we're a sanctuary state. And by the way, there is no such thing as sanctuary state, sanctuary cities. You shouldn't use the term, it's so ridiculous. But they use the term. So there is concern that Connecticut may be on the list. Protesting ICE, protesting the government, demonstrating. I'm a lawyer, I'm not going to tell people, not to assert their First Amendment right. I will worry for people because I have a feeling that the far right is planning on protests and they want to do a massive show of force and really smash up these protests and, bash them up and show how strong they are. Now let me just tell you something that really kind of is curious. Things you learn when you start turning, after you turn 50. Really weak, scared people pick on really weak people without any rights. Is anybody in this room really scared, and is anybody in this room without rights? No. And are you guys going to be afraid if he comes for you? No. Right? I mean, for me, I've had a good 2/3 of my life. If this is how I got to go down, take me down. All right, this is how it goes out. The point is, don't be afraid. And more importantly, when I was talking earlier to you about, this is purpose, we don't know how this ends. Embrace that moment with your own decisions. I mean, obviously be safe and be careful. I'm not saying to be radical. But what I am saying is embrace the moment, right? I mean, how we got here, we can debate, that's for history. Figure out how we got here. We are here now. And there are things that we have to do to protect our community. So let me just talk to you a little bit about that, and then I'll just keep it a side thing at the clock, because I really do want to hear from you and get your concerns out. A couple of ideas. First idea is to sit tight, wait before you do anything. See how things develop after January 21st. Know that I am working, and I have been working, Steve knows this. I am personally working and trying to get some others involved with a tool that will help self-represented people actually have the tools that when they can't find a lawyer, or the 16-year-old kid, his mom got picked up and he comes home from high school to find mom's not at home, I'm hoping that I will have a resource for him on the internet that he can go figure out how to file a bond, or she can go figure out how to file a bond for his mom. By the way, just quick parenthetical, because it's a soft spot for me. What we don't understand in this country is that the children of immigrants, they are absolute platinum. They are a resource that no other part of this world has, and we just ignore it and take it for granted. Because those immigrant kids, when they come in and they're 4 years old, and they sit, their feet hanging over my couch, dangling like this, kind of jiggering because they're nervous and stuff, absolute quiet kids. Because they believe that if they're really good and they work really hard, mom and dad may be able to stay and they don't have to worry about it. And they get a little bit older and they do really well in school. It's called the immigrant curve, because socio and economically everybody else is like, hey, there, naturalized Americans. The immigrant kids are like vertical, and they're off the chart. And they are the most mature kids, they are the most directed kids, and they are incredibly compassionate, all in one. And I've hired many of them to work at different times in my office, partly because I just want that energy in my office, and that just appreciation of them in my office. And they are brilliant, fluent in 2 languages, can figure out anything, any legal problem that comes up, they're like that. Anyhow, that's my parenthetical. But a resource that would be available for those kids when they're trying to become lawyers, just enough so that they can file a bond application to get their parents out. I'm hoping that that resource will also be something that a community such as yours, that should you be presented with somebody in need, you might be able to walk them through the steps. You're not providing legal representation by any means, but you're walking through a tool that can help them file it. Kind of, just the way the 16-year-old kid might be able to print out that form and say, okay, well, apparently, read this in Spanish. You tell me, okay, you're going to go do that. Okay, good. Supporting immigrants directly with their cases, one way or the other. Going with them to a lawyer's office to sit with them as a second set of ears. Going with them when they have to report in to ICE, and just quietly standing witness as ICE does whatever ICE is going to do. Those are sort of first level things that you can do, sort of triage maybe. First aid, maybe not triage, it's first aid. Next level things that you can do to help is you can really go out and try to embrace the community and say, listen, we know some of the kids are afraid, the parents, bring them into the church, bring them into another community center if the church is not, common ground for them because of their background or religion or whatever. And just say, listen, you have a bunch of grandparents that you can call. If something goes wrong, your grandparents may be back in Guatemala or, overseas or whatever. But you have grandparents here that you can call if your mom or dad doesn't come home. Now, their mom and dad is probably going to come home, excuse me. But the psychological support of just knowing that they have somebody who's there and cares about them. The other thing is, what happened under the first administration is there was a tearing of the community fabric because the people who were not documented went out to the sides and, kind of were pulled away. By you asking them to come in, you're saying, hey, you're still part of our community, you're bringing them in, and you're reassuring them that they're part of the fabric and they're protected. Another way that you guys could contribute, I've certainly been asked how to give money and where to give money. I would only say there will be a time when money will be needed within the next month. I would say hold off for now, giving your money to any one organization. I personally don't take money, just to be clear. I'm not a nonprofit, I'm a private lawyer. But there are organizations. What I would do as a community, if you want to do something now, you want to put money this year, is, forgive me, Steve, give it to your church, set up a fund to be used. I think probably by February, we're going to know which organizations are providing the best, most direct relief, like support. We have a lot of good organizations in Connecticut. I don't know how much direct representation, because to my mind, direct representation is what's going to be needed in the first 6 months. Now, we don't have universal rep, meaning not every immigrants aren't entitled to a free lawyer. And it's not a needs-based system, it's just, if you can pay a lawyer, you can pay a lawyer. Micro grants may be something you can do. If you go with an immigrant and they have a lawyer and you've sort of done a little bit of vetting, and just say, fund any lawyer out there, but you've done your due diligence, you could say, listen, we can give a grant to pay that lawyer to represent you on bond hearing. I keep saying bond hearing because I really think there's going to be a lot of detentions, and I really think there's going to be a need for representation at a bond hearing. The tool that I'm trying to develop would be great for non-detains, but the bond hearing, you really can't do that yourself. You really need a lawyer to go in there and make the argument. If you have to do it yourself, there will be a way you can do it yourself. But that's where a donation could work, a micro grant to a specific cause, a specific lawyer, specific case. They're promising 5-6 million removals by, I don't know, August or something, 6 months. It's an astronomical level. I don't think they can do that. I know they can't do it if everybody had representation, because nothing can jam up a system like a bunch of lawyers. But getting those lawyers and coming up with some organization for finding the right lawyers to do the work, that's a big task. But maybe micro grants so that people that come into your orbit, come into this church or somehow affiliated who may need assistance, you would have a micro grant available. Likewise, if you really do end up with 16-year-olds, or I guess I should say that, 18-year-olds taking care of 15-year-olds who are taking care of 12-year-olds who are taking care of 9-year-olds who are taking care of 5-year-olds, and that family might need some financial support. Technically DCF should be involved. I'm not by any means suggesting we go around DCF. I know my clients, they will run from DCF as fast as they run from ICE. So, but there may be ways that you can provide micro grants to families in need, or single moms, maybe a better example, not the 18-year-old, scratch that, strike that. The single mom whose husband got it removed, or the husband who had the mom removed. So these are ways that if you want to come up with some way of giving, I guess my command to you right now would be, don't just fritter away whatever resources you may have. Figure out a way collectively, what's the best way that we can have the most impact on specific individuals, because I think in the first 6 months, that's what's going to be needed. I mean, I think giving to the ACLU is always a worthwhile effort. They are a phenomenal organization. National Immigration Law Center is another phenomenal organization that handles sort of the highbrow stuff. I work among the people. So I see the need down here, not as much up there. So anyway, those are some of the things. Now, we have, I think, 20 or so minutes, so who's got to worry?
Is there a threshold where a person achieves a green card in which he's okay?
No. Not under this incoming administration. Oh, sure. Is there a threshold, make sure I got this right, is there a threshold where someone who has a green card will be protected? Shouldn't have to worry, that's essentially the question? Yeah. No, green card holders should worry under this administration that's coming in. Under the old Trump administration, probably not. There was a brief period under Trump 1, I don't know if you remember this, where people were flying to the airport and they were pulling green cards from people, because under the act, technically they can do that, or they thought they could do that. That was a great moment for lawyers. That was the first time I actually wept watching the news, because they were all going down to JFK, like these white shoe lawyers with really nice shoes, and they were setting up these card tables. This is like a Rob Reiner movie. And they're setting up card tables saying avocado, or, lawyer in Arabic or something. And they had their little Kurzban books. These were lawyers that had never touched an immigration statute in their lives. And they were just trying to figure it out. And they were going in and arguing with ICE and just causing all kinds of mayhem. But that was an example of permanent residents, green card holders, not being secure. That quieted down. I have heard that they intend to review for fraud prior green card applications.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't understand the process, so I'm going to ask very basic. But if ICE picks somebody up, do they get a hearing in our community, or can they be shipped to Texas and before they have any chance to get a bond or have a hearing or whatever? I don't understand the process.
Yeah. Let me add on to that question. So the question is, what's the process when somebody gets picked up? Really quick micro law lesson. When somebody's in the United States without, they're quote undocumented, big picture. There's two ways that they're undocumented. First way is they came into the United States on a visitor visa, a student visa, an H-1B, and they overstayed that visa. They didn't leave during the time allotted, right? They remained out of status. The other way is they come across the border and they ask for asylum typically, or whatever. Or they get off on an airplane and ask for asylum. So they're in the country, but they weren't admitted. They're in this sort of, they weren't admitted to the United States. There's a lot more I can say about that with parole, but I won't. So when ICE picks them up, if somebody was admitted, came in with a visa, and they had some way to get a green card, like let's say they came in with a visa, they got married, but they didn't get around to filing the paperwork for one reason or another, right? They could go in front of the immigration judge and say, Judge, I need time to finish the green card. I want you to adjust my status. This is a really basic example. It gets a lot more complicated. That is a defense to the judge removing them. Now, your question was also, where do they have this hearing? If they're in Connecticut, the hearing would be at Hartford, 450 Main Street. But if they get detained, and they're shipped to Texas, and it's generally going to be in Texas. It's
So
called
they
venue.
they can be shipped to Texas before they ever see a
The judge
lawyer
here.
or a judge here.
Right. The reason I gave you that micro lesson, and just to kind of break up the question a little bit, is really to highlight that there are some defenses to it. So when you go in front of the judge in Texas, even if you got shipped to Texas, and you say, hey, judge, I actually am eligible to adjust status. That would be really good, and here's proof that it's a bona fide marriage, and it's blah, blah, blah about my wife or my husband. That would be a really good reason to give that person bond, release them from Texas. They can fly back to Connecticut and they would finish the process up in Hartford. Now, if somebody is here and doesn't have any legal status, like came across the border, they can't adjust status, even if they're married to a U.S. citizen, even if they are the son, the parent of a U.S. citizen child over 21. There's really no way for them to claim status. There's some minor exceptions, victim of a crime. They've been physically present for 10 years before they got picked up. There's this relief called cancellation of removal. If they have a fear of being returned to their country, that's more than just, oh, I'm afraid to go back. They can apply for asylum. But we're talking about very limited forms of relief. For them, they would have a hearing in Texas. It is unlikely that they would get bond. If you're following my example, if they came in with a visa and they have some way to adjust status, they're probably going to get bond, or they would stand a good chance of getting bond, maybe not. They may have some minor criminal history, whatever. But they would stand a better chance. If they don't, then they're going to stay in Texas, even if they're going to try to apply for some form of relief like asylum, maybe even cancellation of removal wouldn't be, unless they had really compelling hardship. And I'll explain maybe later about cancellation of removal, because it's not what people think it is. It is available.
So perhaps a decade ago, maybe longer, there was a significant raid in New Haven.
Yeah.
That ended up, I believe, in court, and ICE was slapped on the wrist, as I understand it, and people that were pulled out were allowed to come back.
Yeah.
Can you talk about cities like New Haven, where I spend a lot of my time, in a community that has a lot of immigrants?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how New Haven is going to be regarded this time?
So New Haven is one of those sanctuary cities. I just want to put a pin in that balloon, because I think sanctuary city, I've never liked the term sanctuary city. I really don't like the way it's been co-opted by the right wing to sort of like imply that a city like New Haven, they're suddenly safe. They're not. ICE can go anywhere, any city, call it sanctuary, whatever. It's not. Generally what sanctuary just means is that unless they're a serious criminal felon, merely going to the police, merely going to pay your taxes, merely going to housing court, merely doing these things are not going to end up having you referred to ICE. Now, down in some of our crazy brethren states, those same activities could result in being reported to ICE. I think that I could be wrong on this, so somebody should fact check me. But down in Florida, they had a bill that passed last year, SB 1714. I can't remember names, but for some reason I can remember that. This is weird thing about getting older. Hope they treat me well at the home. I'll be citing statutes, but I won't remember anybody's name. 1714 criminalized a lot of basic life activities. So, if you hired an undocumented person to come clean your gutters, in theory, you could be arrested as a felony in Florida. Ron DeSantis. And that reminded me of, I got more for the hope. I'll come back to that. But that's really what we're talking about with sanctuary cities, is that we're not, we're allowing undocumented immigrants, absent serious criminal offenses, to live peaceably, to enjoy the, protections of the police without being, fear of being turned over to the police. So, and that's not sanctuary. That's just like, and technically it's not the job of the city to work for ICE. Now, there's talk about this administration deputizing and marshalizing the National Guard to aid with apprehending immigrants. I'm going to put something in the hope bucket, but let me give you guys a little bit of anxiety. Told you this was a sharing experience. Let me tell you my anxiety that what'll happen is, and it's been talked about, and I think it's been tested a few times, but not finalized in the courts. So right outside your door, just over there, is the ocean. According to a legal theory forwarded by the far right, that is an international border, which means 30 miles from the international border is a free zone for Border Patrol. So that just like down in Texas, up to Eagle Pass is like 30 miles from the border, you can be randomly stopped by ICE. They can do traffic stops. They can ask you for identity documents. They are allowed to profile you based on what you look like. If you look like you're undocumented, I mean, it's like free range, right? So my fear is that somehow that's going to become Connecticut, like 30 miles north. We're going to be a border state, suddenly. In fact, the entire East Coast in, which means all the major cities, all the way up through Maine. And I just don't know, I don't know if Chief Justice Roberts, where his heart lies with all this now. I mean, he's amazed me with some of the decisions he's been willing to go with the extreme right. I mean, I do have hope with Judge Gorsuch, but
So, well, just if I could follow up. So, last I heard, the administration, the incoming administration, was going to target undocumented aliens with some sort of legal problems. Either they've had some sort of criminal background before they came to this country, or they've been in some sort of legal difficulty since they
yeah,
came
I
here.
mean,
Is the plan that you understand that those people are going to be targeted first, and then they're going to move on to simply undocumented?
so to answer your question, whether or not they're going to focus just on immigrants with criminal records, right? In theory, I don't really have a problem with that, personally. And maybe it's the one thing that I might agree with the Trump administration. But I also agreed with the Biden administration, because that's what the Biden administration did. And frankly, that's what Obama did, and that's what Bush did. I mean, that's what everybody does, is they target serious criminal records. Now, let me just tell you, though, I have a podium with it. You get a chance to share my opinion. Why I'm always suspicious when they say we're going to target those criminals. Two reasons. One is when they go to get dad, who may have a criminal record, and they see mom and the aunt and the friend next door, they don't have their documents. They end up in the wagon going up to ICE as well, and I've seen that. The second thing that I'm concerned about is that means every time somebody gets a criminal summons, even if it's not a serious criminal summons, they know that if they go to court, they're going to get deported. So that means they fail to appear, which means they end up with a pretty serious criminal record when it may have been dismissed. And sorry, I'm a dewy-eyed liberal lawyer. I kind of believe people get a chance to either prove they're innocent or be proven they're guilty before they go to court. And when you're running these, quote, criminal raids, they're picking up all those people as well. The final thing that I will tell you, because I just litigated this not more than 2 years ago, funny footnote to it, but I had a fella that I picked up after he had been in front of an immigration judge. He was accused of a drug deal where there was a scale and he had cash. He was Jamaican. And of course his defense was the scale was for chicken, and the cash was because he got paid in cash. Kind of plausible. I mean, I'm just saying, right? Well, as it turned out, the drug deal that they were accusing him of in court, when they found the other guy, and they ended up dismissing the charges against him. However, when he was in front of the immigration judge, because he got picked up at the courthouse, you know, at a pretrial, he gets picked up. He goes in front of the immigration judge now in Boston, because they were detaining him up in Massachusetts, so he went to the Boston judge. The judge starts asking him questions about whether he's guilty based on a police report, which was actually thrown out because the police report was shown to be faulty. But in the record that I had to work on appeal, the judge was asking him basically to waive his Fifth Amendment rights. So he's locked up in Massachusetts. He can't defend himself in Connecticut against a charge that he says I'm absolutely innocent in. You know, it was chicken and the cash was because I work, right? The judge deports him, sends him off. He fortunately was smart enough to hold his ground and to not admit that he committed any crimes. The judge wanted him to commit crimes, A, to get bond, and then later, because his wife was an American citizen, as an act of discretion. The judge said, even though you're validly married, as an act of discretion, because you're a criminal, unconvicted, but you're a criminal, you're deported. I'm not giving you a green card.
Wow.
And then the case was dismissed. I got the case reopened. The son of a gun got picked up on another criminal charge. But my point is, on that charge, that's the footnote, on that charge, he was totally innocent. And that's the problem when they say they're going to target criminals. What you're really saying is, you're not just targeting criminals, you're targeting the accused at the courthouse. You're denying people their rights. So, be critical when you hear that, is all I'm saying. Yes, if somebody's a convicted murderer, felon, whatever, fine. Send them on their way. But don't mess with their due process. Due process right. And the other thing I would point out, you know, we have this really weird system where we benefit from the labor of immigrants. Like if Trump gets everything he wants, we are going to be paying not, you know, we're whining about $5 eggs. How about $25 pound chicken, right? How about not even having a lot of produce because there was nobody to pick it? How about fixing your roof in July when the roof is leaking and you don't have anybody from Guatemala willing to go up there at 110-degree heat for $12 an hour, right? And then on top of that, we criminalize just about everything with immigrants. They tend to get pulled over more, they tend to be upcharged with criminal violations more than average. And if that sounds familiar to anybody, it should, because that's the black code. This idea of felony, aggravated felony, crime involving moral turpitude, criminalizing a lot of low-level offenses, upcharging them, and then our Immigration Act turns them into deportable aliens. And there's a reason to do that, is because we want that labor force afraid, working hard, and not organizing, not standing up for their rights, not making a workers' comp claim. I've had more clients fall off roofs, and I'm like, hey, there's a way I might be able to monetize this immigration practice. They won't file a workers' comp claim. And down in Texas and other parts, from what I hear, if they did, they could be referred to ICE. Think about that. Think about what we're really doing when we say, you know, immigrants are, you know, they're the bad ones, the criminal ones, right? What are we doing? Yes, agree. Sometimes people do things, they make mistakes, they shouldn't be here. You know, there are bad people that come across the border. I tell you, more good people by a factor of 95% or 99% come across that border are good people, people that we will benefit from. But this criminalization is just so overextended. Sorry, I feel better.
There's been talk about a case moving up through the courts beginning in Texas, trying to prevent the children of immigrants from accessing public schools. Do you know anything about
Yeah,
this?
Plyler v. Doe. Anybody who just has a hard time sleeping like I do, if you go on OYEZ, O-Y-E-Z, you can actually go on the Supreme Court website. You can listen to the oral arguments of these, pretty much any case in the past, I don't know, 70 years. And for some reason, it just puts me in peace. If you get a chance, Plyler v. Doe, the oral argument on that case, even for a non-lawyer, for one thing, I think it was Justice Berger was in that one. His voice is so soothing. Like the second he comes, he asks a question, I'm like, gone. Off in dreamland. But a really, really intelligent explanation of why states should not be allowed to deny public education. Texas, Judge Abbott trying to outdo, Judge Abbott, he was Governor Abbott trying to outdo Governor DeSantis on how cruel and stupid we can be, has pushed this with his brilliant Attorney General, who I can remember a statute, but not the name. Paxton, thank you. I was just about to say. Is pushing this up to the Supreme Court. So it is possible that the Supreme Court may decide that Connecticut children are no longer allowed to go to school, in public school. So Old Lyme would not have to educate children. So remember I told you my soft spot for immigrant children? So we're gonna get rid of them too.
Could they choose to if they wanted to, the school?
Depends on what the Supreme Court says. Whether or not, because they're also going to either weaponize or defund the Department of Education. I just know how that's going to work out. And then we got, Linda Mann as the Education Secretary. There's just going to be a lot of crazy going on. I know a lot of people are worried about Plyler. I'm a quiet, I actually, on the issue of immigration, I'm a quiet fan of Judge Gorsuch. I don't think he'll let that go. Judge Gorsuch is a really complicated human being. If you look at his decisions, you're like, but on Native American rights and immigration, he is the most articulate stalwart. Just really, and he writes beautifully and eloquently on immigration. And he really puts it to the government with their crazy immigration schemes. So, as long as Roberts remains, in the middle, we've got Gorsuch on our side, and then Kavanaugh. Who knows? I think Kavanaugh is influenced by Gorsuch, so maybe Plyler will be fine.
In Connecticut, we have, you probably wouldn't know the name, but you probably know the number. I think it's called the SAFE Act.
Oh, Trust Act.
Trust Act, yes. Okay, you do know the name, congratulations. Where, our law enforcement and court officials and whatnot are prevented from cooperating with ICE. What do we do when, for instance, this happens during the last Trump administration, a police officer has an interaction with an immigrant who did not commit a crime, has no reason to be withheld, so the police officer can't do anything, but then calls ICE?
So that technically, the Trust Act is a little bit of a statement of values more than a real block. It's something we can litigate, right?
So you can't just call your police department and file a complaint that he did this.
They're talking about, as a fact, I just said something at Stanford about 2 weeks ago with the Attorney General, and he was talking about the need to improve the Trust Act. I had a case with a guy who was pulled over. He was driving to work in his pickup, and he accidentally rear-ended somebody with a trailer. Nobody got hurt. The trailer the hitch kind of got pushed a little bit, and then they had to fix the hitch. But the state trooper held him on the side of the road for 45 minutes, and an ICE fan just happened to come by. No criminal history. And I was not going to stand for that. I brought a lawsuit against the police officer and the state police, and I claimed all kinds of civil rights violations, Trust Act, blah, blah, blah. And sorry, judge dismissed the case. So, yeah.
Is there any recourse for someone who has come into the country illegally, but has been here for a very long time?
Yeah, so there's something called cancellation removal, which I alluded to earlier. There's like 4,000 granted a year and like 200,000. I don't know the exact statistic, but it's a small chance you'll ever get it. But you have to be physically present for 10 years without leaving, except for maybe a short absence. Have a qualifying relative, it's a green card holding spouse, parent, child, or a citizen spouse, parent, or child. And that if you are removed, it would be an extreme and unusual hardship to those individuals, and you are a person of, quote, good moral character, meaning no criminal history and you're a member of your community. But that's it. I mean, I only cringe when people talk about cancellation or removal because they're like unicorns. I mean, I've seen them, so I've seen a unicorn, and I've won those cases, but not a lot over the years. And even after you win them, you just wait and wait and wait because there's no visa numbers available.
My husband, oh, go ahead. My husband and I took in a young woman from China. She had come here. She's a college graduate. She had come here as a mother's helper. She decided she wanted to get a master's degree and stay here and teach Mandarin in the U.S. So she got accepted to UConn, and because we are not too far away from the local campus, we told her she could live with us. So she lived with us for a year, and she finished her classwork. She got a job teaching English, but it was only a half-time position. The school said, we don't have the money for you, but if we can get more money, we will hire you on a full-time basis. So it was half-time. And she got a second job to help her earn money. Then she gets a notice from the government saying that your student visa has run out and you have to go back to China. And because she didn't have a full-time job and they wouldn't swear for her, she was given a date and you have to be out. But she found out that if she continued her education for 2 more years, she could get her student visa would be extended, which she did. But there's a very uneasy feeling this second 2 years. It's not in UConn anymore. It's an online program. It doesn't sound quite as good as
So just to summarize for those that may be in here, so it's a complicated story, as they all are, about a student who came from China on a student visa, worked on what I'm presuming is something called occupational training, OPT, which, depending on what you study, you get 1 year after you graduate or 2 years. If you're in STEM, science, technology, engineering, or math, you get 2 years. And that's a very odd term because, like, business majors in certain finance concentrations can get STEM, whatever. But the issue for students, and for students like her, is that once you have that, how do you get legal status here? And so, and if you fall out of student status, you're really in trouble. In fact, a lot of visa overstays, I don't have the accurate statistic, are students. And they fall out of status for a couple of reasons. Oftentimes, they believe they can adjust status. I'm speaking anecdotally now. They're under a belief that, oh, if I just stay a little bit longer, I'll get that job offer. In her case, maybe a full-time teaching position. They'll file the paperwork for me, and I'll have a green card. The problem with our employment-based immigration system is it takes a very long time. And if you fall out of status, even for a short period of time, you're no longer eligible.
Yeah.
So you have, like, students that become, in her case, she goes and gets another student visa to keep that status open. And she's hoping she'll get OPT. And while she's on OPT, she's hoping they'll file for an H-1B, which is, there's only like 50,000 a year, and like 250,000 apply. And then there's another 25,000 for people with masters, so it's like 75,000 total. It's a ridiculous, and it's always up in Congress to increase the number of visas. These are really, I mean, these are the people that made my iPad. You know, I mean, high-level technology workers, like, we would not have that camera, or the software, or Silicon Valley if we did not have students come here and adjust their status. But we have created this ridiculous system that if they fall out of status, even if they later get a work authorization, they can't stay. And they're just kind of gummed up in this system. So to answer your question, specifically to her case, if she falls out of status, she's in a lot of trouble. What I usually tell my Yale students who come in tears in their eyes, that they've got to go back, or the doctors that say, you know, if I can just stay here an extra few months, I'm sure I'll get this internship, is go back to your country. Go help your country. Go build that country into a better place. Because America, we don't care. We don't need you. We'd rather see you go elsewhere. I mean, we have the all-star team, and then we just trade off our players. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that maybe that's a good thing, that we send them back. But I think it's a sad thing. So.
Can ICE come into our homes? If somebody were staying with me, could ICE come in and?
Under current regulations, no, not without a warrant. And you don't even have to open the door. But what ICE will probably do is come to the door and say, open up, it's the police. But do we not say ICE?
Really? Ask him to show her that.
Once you open the door and let them in, it's, you know,
Show your badge.
So you don't have to open?
you don't have to let ICE in. Now, I'm going to tell you though, there's a statute that is interpreted, I think it's 1324. See? I almost forgot William Todd's name, but I remember that statute. That if you are harboring somebody with a final order of removal or helping them to evade, you could be subject to a crime. So in saying don't open the door, in saying, you know, that person is your guest in your house is your sanctuary, tell them to go get a warrant, you are taking on legal risk, just to be upfront. I mean, it's how do you deal with that and whether you really be at risk, I don't know. But you could be exposed. And if they really get, I mean, just so you know, as an attorney, technically, and this was a case, it died out because COVID hit, and I don't know what happened, it just died in the courts. But there was a time where me as an attorney, there was a lawsuit that said I could be guilty of violating that statute if I tell my client not to leave the country. Kidding me? I'm like, what? I mean, you mean I can't give them advice to say, hey, we can file a motion to reopen, you know, don't leave. I'm always careful with my word.
Same thing at the church, I presume?
Now, churches are covered under a different, law. I mean, you do have to be careful depending on how you handle it, but technically, until they change it, churches are considered sensitive areas. So schools, churches, hospitals are still sensitive areas. I think the school thing is going. I think they're just going to go grab people at schools. Hospitals, probably going. I think churches, churches may be the last to go. I mean, I have hope because, and I hold a lot of churches accountable for allowing, not so much Trump, maybe that would be a good place to finish up. Not so much Trump, I mean, Steve was talking about politics and embracing politics in the moment. Speaking out about values. There's a lot of Christian churches that have spoken about values that I don't think are very New Testament or Old Testament. I don't think they really have anything to do with the church, right? But they were a big voting bloc for Trump. And even though I just think the optics for Trump, for this incoming administration, it'd be pretty tough. I mean, even a church that may have shaded in the red letters a bit would have a hard time seeing a fellow Christian church rated. I mean, we still are 70%, I think. I think Judaism is 2%. Islam is like 1%. Everybody else is another 1%. So we're still a majority church. So I think as the majority church, I think I think Christians have 70% of the responsibility for the morality on immigration, you know? And I think Christian churches need to speak out the loudest. I mean, that's not to say anything about any of the other religions. I just think that we created this, we need to fix this. Just by numbers we created this, right? If you're saying Judaism is 2% and everybody else is like 1 or 2%, 70%. So it's 70% our responsibility, or maybe it's 72% our responsibility. So if they want to raid your church, you know, I don't want to be a radical here, but they want to come in and do that, well, take the church. When they start taking over the churches, I think that will be the red line for everybody, you know. You just don't do that. Sorry, that was a little dark. I didn't mean to. You got to think of one more thing for the whole bucket. Give me a question to put in the whole bucket. Yeah.
Here's a whole question.
Okay.
How many immigration lawyers do we have in Connecticut related to how many people who are at risk of deportation?
I'd be making up a number. We're a very small immigration bar. You know, I was, the day after the election, I was at the American Immigration Lawyers Conference in Monterey, which is a really special place, by the way. First time I had ever been to Monterey. Just like, if you get a chance, like, that place is like, it's a little bit of old line on the West Coast, but like, wow. Bunch of nerds. Like, the most unlikely bunch of people to have to defend against this policy. And I remember looking around the room, and just to be clear, I'm one of them. It's not like I'm saying, you know, hey, I'm cool. But really, like small law firms, solo law firms, you know, some of them still have the mustard from lunch on their shirt. And this is it? This is the army? This is how we're going to take it down? Oh, really, I just had a moment that I just said, oh, God.
Isn't the problem that the clients don't have the money to pay the lawyers?
Yeah, and yeah, if you were to ask other immigration lawyers about Glenn Formica, they'd be that righteous, fill in the blank. Because he's always, you know, carping on about this or carping on about that and stuff. Yeah, they don't. An average immigration case, to be fair, let me just give you math that I'm not really qualified to give, but you figure 40 to 60 hours. A lawyer is kind of like the guy at Firestone, you know, it's an hourly worker, you know, and you pay, what, $175 an hour now to get a break job? You know, that covers all the overhead, the labor. We don't have any parts. So it's all labor. So our hourly rate, just to run a law office, make a meager, truly meager salary, is maybe like $3.50 an hour, depending on how fancy your office is and how many staff you have. So when you multiply that times 40, 60, I mean, you're talking like $10,000. So you hear about these exorbitant fees, right? That's not really the thing to look at, you know. If that lawyer gets that fee and that client can pay that fee, fine. It's the quality of the work for that fee. And there are some lawyers that charge that fee and do 10 hours of work. So that's where I kind of get a little critical about the bar. It's not the fee, but they're small offices. Getting back to your question, they're not well resourced. They have to go in, and that's a real problem. I mean, Steve knows I was, you know, my great passion was trying to get universal representation for all immigrants in Connecticut. We had a very generous funder a few years ago, and you know, it's kind of like Frodo with the ring. You know, once you start promising that kind of money to nonprofits, it's a lot of money, and it kind of just dissolved, unfortunately. I don't know if we'll ever get it back, but I do think there are other ways that we can address that problem of representation.
So Glenn, I mean, I just feel like, I wish we could keep you here with us.
No, I love being here. I just promised Steve that I would prep.
Couple of things. We put a pad of paper and a pen
Yeah.
out there. On your way out, if you'd like to put your name down, your contact information, and we would keep it, you know, private. It's just if there is some action or something that we could mobilize around, we would send an email out. So feel free to do that.
Yeah, let me wrap up with that.
Yeah.
You know, for me, the best thing to do when I'm worried about something is to do something. And so action is always better than inaction, you know, in terms of your own anxiety level and your own personal outrage. And I'll just go back because I'm really stuck on this silly metaphor or allegory. You know, bigger rocks get broken into smaller rocks, and smaller rocks in the gravel, and we build the road. I mean, that's really what it's about, right? So that's how we're going to get through the next 4 years.
Yeah.
We're just going to break big rocks into little rocks and little rocks in the gravel. And at some point, you know, the road will be done, and so will we. But that road will be there forever. So, all right, that's it. Thank you.
Before Steve, thanks Glenn, I want to tell you all that the ACLU is doing a town hall meeting here on the 9th of January. They have, I think, 5 scheduled across the state of Connecticut. We're the meeting on the shoreline. They have, in December, they have some of these meetings, 250 people signed up already. So your enthusiasm is important. So watch for that opportunity to sign up for ACLU Thursday night, January 9th, right here.
Yeah, if I could, I should have mentioned that before. The last time we had a Trump administration, the Connecticut ACLU, I'm a big fan of the national contributors. The Connecticut ACLU didn't have any funds. This time around, they've been funded, and what I just heard is they have 3 lawyers dedicated to removal defense and, you know, litigating in Connecticut. I've yet to meet them. I know very little bit about it. I will probably come out on January 9th if I have if I'm available to see. I'm very excited about them stepping into the breach.
So let's thank Glenn once again. Let me just close by thanking all of you for being here. It really does matter that we are finding one another, some of us once again, some of us for the first time, but finding one another in this time and coming together and starting to think about what needs to be done. So it's good to see all of you here, and I'm really, really grateful, so thank you.